Rutgers Rant. Steve Politi from NJ Advanced Media joined, as always, James Cratch, Keith Sargent. Sarge, we tried to replace you last week with Brian Fonseca. He was more personable than you, funnier, and had more information. And yet we're still going to let you back on the podcast this week. I hope you understand that generosity coming from us here.
Hey, don't do me any favors. If I could have this half hour free to, every week, it would allow me to concentrate on other things, such as really nothing.
No such luck. Sorry, you're in. No off for you. All right, let's get right to it. Fellas, we have a hoops basketball crisis here. 4 straight losses, 3 straight at home. The latest, a 60-54 loss to number 9 Wisconsin with what I can only describe as an abysmal offensive performance. Look, I don't know where you stand on this. I am jamming the panic button. I think this is a bad trend. I get it that the team believes that they played better defensively and they rebounded better in the Wisconsin loss than they had in the 2 losses before that. But that said, I just don't like the direction this team's headed right now. And I understand the schedule gets a little easier, but you're at the point now where you're 3-5 in the Big Ten. You've got 12 Big Ten games left. You're running the margin of error is getting pretty small for this team. If they lose to Penn State, they stumble in one of these next 3 of the next 4 games on the road. If they stumble against a team that they should beat, there's some big trouble here. Cratch, where do you stand on the panic or not panic side of the ledger here in this debate?
I'm actually going to be on the not panic side, just because. And this is my thing. I just have a very hard time getting too carried away game by game in college basketball because it just feels like, big swings up and down. This team we were thinking about the top 10 2 weeks ago, and now they've been out of the rankings for 2 weeks, So, look, I will say we are approaching the panic point. But I just think right now you have 12 Big Ten games left, plus that game against Seton Hall, which I'm sure is just going to be scheduled any day now. It's coming, guys. I'm telling you, it's totally coming.
Oh yeah, they say
so. No, which actually, quick aside, I've wondered, if they were to lose to Penn State or something, or if they continue to struggle, does Steve Pikiell just literally have to grab some tomato can and put them in the middle of the week just to get their groove back? No, I just think you still got 12 Big Ten games left. The schedule does loosen up. I know that they've been losing at the rack, which is so foreign to us. But at the same time, every gym is like the rack this year. So maybe if they go on the road in the coming weeks, it won't be as hard for them to win there. They still have some quality wins in their hands. We saw them play so well against Iowa and be right there. So I don't think we're there yet. But if they lose to Penn State, I think you were definitely in a panic mode. But I tend to think that I go back to last year where the wheels were kind of about to fall off the wagon very early on. They beat Wisconsin at home and kind of took off from there. I still think that's a moment we're having this Thursday that if they beat Penn State, they're back on track.
All right, Sarge, break the tie here. Are you panicking? Are you with me? Or are you with Cratch? There's nothing to see here.
I'm with Cratch. There are a couple things that we've seen with this team right now that I do not like. Obviously, it's the free throw shooting, the shooting in general.
Shoot, I'd say anything at this point.
Yeah. We have seen spurts where the team, isn't this bad offensively. I think they're going to improve from an offensive standpoint. Free throws, I'm as perplexed as everyone else. I mean, I heard what you guys talked about last week. It's been a constant theme with this club under Steve Pikiell. If there's one weakness, year in, year out, that's it. This year, no different. What I do like is defensively. That's been his bread and butter. And defense is the one thing that, if they can consistently play defense like they did this past week against Wisconsin, they're going to be okay. Defense, generally, indicates that, that they're giving effort. If they can continue playing at that level, they're going to win more games than they lose. Again, the Penn State game is a make or break. I mean, you can't understate, just how big of a game that is.
Right. All right. So one other thing I'll say, I agree with you defensively. I also agree that they've had 2 consistent performers, Jacob Young and Miles Johnson have both been excellent, and a couple of lags here and there for Johnson especially, but for the most part, they've been there the entire time. What worries me though are the 2 stars now. You're looking at a situation where you got Ron Harper Jr. You look like he was going to be a Big Ten Player of the Year candidate, and I think teams have figured out how to defend him. I mean, I think they're taking away the three-pointer. They're taking away transition opportunities for him, and you're just seeing that he is not excelling the same way he was earlier in the season offensively. And Geo Baker has just not looked like the same player all season. And that could be because he's hurt. Obviously he missed some games early on with a high ankle sprain. That could take away some of your rhythm, take some of your confidence. But, unless one of those guys doesn't find their shot, doesn't, start taking this team over offensively, I think they're in trouble. And I think there's a chemistry thing going on too, Cratch. And look, we all were excited when they got Caleb McConnell back. You thought there was going to be more depth on this team, working for the freshmen. And now I wonder if they were at a point where they're playing really good with 6-7 guys at most on the court, and now you're trying to work 2 more guys into it. The rotation doesn't look. I think there's just a lot going on here for a team in late January.
No, I definitely think Jaden Jones is coming in, and it seems like they haven't said he's going to play this year, but they haven't really firmly shut the door and said he's not going to play. It's a free year. You're using all these guys. I think the one thing with Ron Harper is this is sort of the way he was last year. He'd go score 27 points, and then he'd go score 5 points. Like he was inconsistent with his offensive production last year. If he can be that this year, then Rutgers has to hope, okay, maybe now we're in a valley and he's about to hit another peak and we can kind of take off. I think you're absolutely right. Gio just doesn't seem like the same guy since early on the season. And look, I think one of the things we're going to talk about over the next 12 games, Steve Peichel has to kind of calm everything down. And you're right. He's got a lot of moving pieces all of a sudden. He's got to figure out how to push all the right buttons, pull all the right strings, and get it together and get this team to March.
All right. If we're looking at the good news, you mentioned March. Checked out the bracketology projections today. They're still in all the prominent ones. It's not a great spot. They were a 9 seed in ESPN's bracketology with tournament favored Gonzaga, waiting them in the second round should they get there. An 8 seed for CBS in a similar situation, having to obviously face the 1 in the second round. That's good news. But looking at the schedule now, all right, so you got to figure they need to go 7-5 to get to 500 in the league. They got number 4 Iowa, at number 7 Michigan, 2 games against number 17 Minnesota still left to play. There's zero room to stumble. Granted, now, if you look at a little deeper, you got 6 games against the teams directly below them, and 2 against two against Indiana, which is a virtual tie. So there are winnable games. The schedule is easier, but there are still some tough games in that schedule, Sarge.
Yeah, I mean, it leads me back to Peichel talked about today. He said that generally speaking, they play well in the second half. When you talk about what's going to get them in, I've talked to a few people. I've seen some of the mock brackets as well. It looks like they're going to get 8 teams safely from the Big Ten in. I think if they finish 500 in the league, I think they'll probably be right around there. So look. We can't overstate enough, where if we were doing this podcast on Friday, can we do this podcast on Friday and just wait to see, what this Penn State game means?
What fun is that, though? Come on.
No, there's no fun. We have to speculate. But again, I think if they beat the Penn State team, I think it cures a lot of ills. Also, keep in mind they're healthy now. I mean, this is the first time they've been able to actually play the entire roster. So it'll be interesting to see. You mentioned Peichel. He generally, I listened to today with the media, said all the right things. He did mention that he seems like he's not panicking. You asked a question at the very beginning, who's panicking. Listening to him today, he's definitely not panicking.
Right. The fan base is off the rails panicking, and a lot of criticism being pointed at Steve Peichel, which
there is.
I think it's a little crazy, obviously, but there are some things I think it's fair to criticize him about on some levels too.
Right?
Yeah. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic to see what happens if this team does go in the opposite direction. Which you're right. We're at a point now, Cratch, where I could see this thing going either way.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. And look, Steve Peichel's not going to lose his job.
Of course not.
No one's saying that.
Not. Nothing that could happen the rest of the way.
But it's going to change the trajectory of the program.
He'll face some tough questions.
Yeah,
that's what I was going to say. Look, it's year 5. It's year 5 for Steve Peichel. Right at the buzzer before the pandemic hit, he got handed a big contract extension.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you need at some point
He's a big boy.
He's a big boy, yeah.
Yeah, if they don't make the tournament this year, with the roster that they have, everyone, it's a weird
major disappointment.
It is a major disappointment. Now, I still think they're on pace to make the tournament. I think a couple weeks ago, I thought they could be like a top 4 seed and have a chance to go to the Sweet 16 or even deeper. Right now, I think, okay, make the tournament, avoid the first 4, which I think is probably going to be like played at the Hoosiers gym, down the road or something.
Where's that? I haven't thought about that. Where is that going to happen?
That'd be great. I actually spent an afternoon
Imagine Rutgers' first NCAA tournament game in 31 years.
That would be
played at IUPUI.
West Lafayette High School.
No, played in the Hoosier gym where they did the movie Hoosiers. That would be cool.
There could be bigger games there, though. I think that, they could have some real games at the Hoosiers.
That would be cool.
Anyway, yes. I mean, look, yes, of course he should be criticized. I mean, he's the head coach of a Big Ten basketball program in New Jersey whose team is skidding after being almost in the top 10 a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yes, in any walk of life, there's going to be a little bit of criticism set toward you in that situation.
Right. And the only thing, and just easily solvable, the next 4 games, again, winnable games, Penn State, Indiana, Northwestern, Michigan State. Again, they have never beaten Michigan State, but, I think the bigger jinx was when Fonseca came on the podcast and declared them to be terrible. Awful. Yeah. They say awful. That was a...
Tom Izzo was listening. There's no question. Tom Izzo
absolutely. He played that in the locker room. Yeah,
without doubt.
Right. That's why we had to have you back on, Sarge. That prediction you just did not stand. Send the rookie back to put minor leagues after that.
He came out hot.
I loved it. He came out hot, but didn't turn out to be accurate. All right, let's dive into true or false because I want to get your definite opinion on what's going to happen here. The rules. True or false? Ready? True or false? This is bad. Penn State will knock the Scarlet Knights onto the tournament bubble on Thursday. Cratch, true or false?
False. Rutgers wins by like 15-20 on Thursday.
Right.
Putting the stake into the ground.
Sarge, true or false?
False. Rutgers will win.
True or false? Don't worry. Rutgers is going to win the next 4 games and everything will be just fine. Cratch, true or false?
True. 4-0. I'm calling it.
All right. Sarge?
3-1.
3-1. That would be. I think they'd sign for 3-1 at this point. True or false? Steve Peichel deserves some criticism for the recent slump. James Cratch, we talked about a little bit. True or false?
True.
All right, Sarge.
True.
Fair enough. I will.
True. Yeah. Let's get back to that one. After that.
All right. True or false in football? Tyshawn Fogg's return will give Greg Schiano a top 5 Big Ten defense next year. James Cratch.
False.
Expectations high. False for you, Sarge. True or false?
False.
False. All right. You're down on, I guess that probably was too high. Maybe I was wrong. All right. True or false? Chris Ash will be an NFL head coach someday. James Cratch, true or false?
True.
Oh, what?
I'm just saying to get the conversation.
He's a DB coach, first off. He's not a coordinator in Jacksonville.
Put that on the T for him.
Oh my God, he said true. Yeah, where I'm going.
I wanted to discuss it. I had to make sure we got to the discussion part of this.
All right. True or false? Nick Suriano, future Olympic gold medalist. James Cratch.
True.
True or false? Wow.
Gold. I'll say he's in the Olympics with gold. That's
that's tough.
False.
False. I could go false there.
I don't want him beating me up though. If I do see him on campus again.
And finally, true or false? LeGrand coffee is great, but Eric should have called it LeGrand. Cratch, true or false? LeGrand.
False.
False. All right, Sarge.
I love the name. First off, the coffee. My wife got me both a mug and the Guatemalan brew. Great, phenomenal, really, really good. I was, I went in with high expectations and it exceeded it.
My favorite part of this,
and the mug is a quality mug.
While you were off, Sarge, you missed this. I got an email from Cratch. He's like, "Hey, maybe I can talk us into a road trip, an enterprise story where I go with Eric to Costa Rica to check on his coffee beans." And I think he was like half serious in this idea that he was going to fly to Costa Rica with Eric LeGrand, and they were going to like do an inventory, pick some coffee beans like Juan Valdez it down there. Cratch, tell me you were serious about this, right?
So I wrote a story on NJ.com. A lot of people read it, and I interviewed Eric. And I said he told me Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Sumatra, like the 3 places they're starting with, and they're going to add more. And I said, once this pandemic's over, like you got to go visit these places, right? And actually, be there as the beans are harvested. And Eric goes, it's funny he said that. Like, I was telling my team, like we're gonna have to like go on like not like a mission trip, but like we're gonna have to go see what's going on down there. Wow. So I was like, if you go, maybe we'll tag along.
I love this.
Costa Rica's beautiful.
That's great.
Another thing is too, like I guess Eric, it sounds like the location of Woodbridge. He told me it's gonna be finalized next couple of weeks. He'll announce it. Yep. They're gonna call it the LeGrand opening.
Oh, see that's good.
So I told Eric, I'm like, you gotta trademark that. If you have a franchise, he's like, you probably should. You're right. So
yeah, I do know the location. I was sworn to secrecy, but it's a good location. It's in a good part of Woodbridge. So more, I guess he'll announce that at some point.
I just think it's amazing that Eric literally came up with the idea in July, had his first cup of coffee in August, and it's going to launch, hopefully, this August. But I mean, as I told Eric, only Eric LeGrand could get a awesome product and coffee shop off the ground in less than a year.
Pretty amazing. I mean, it took us like a year and a half just to rename our stupid podcast. I mean, right? And he got a coffee business off the ground.
I have trouble getting a cup of coffee every morning.
I know, about to say the K-cup. Oh, gosh. All right, so we wanted to get, obviously, Chris Ash will be an NFL head coach someday. We wanted to jumpstart that conversation. He is, if you missed it, folks, he is the defensive backs coach for Urban Meyer now with the Jacksonville Jaguars.
So, like if I was a betting man, I would bet no. But I was talking with someone at Rutgers, and I said, it's not ridiculous. Because we had a great, I forget his name, the person's name. I'm so sorry for that. A great subscriber question sent me, asked NJ.com/insider Rutgers text, has there ever been a coach who was a disaster in college, but then became a successful NFL head coach? And I actually looked at it, and there's quite a few. I mean, Marv Levy, Lou Saban, Jim Call. Yeah, Marv Levy was coach for 13 years. And William and Mary, Cal, I think another school, and he was like 30 games under 500. Jim Caldwell. Bill Walsh,
but went the other direction, right? Bill Walsh
had success at Stanford. So there have been those guys like that. Bill Parcells went 3-8, I think, in 1 year at Air Force.
Right.
So I felt like, look, let's say Urban has major success. I mean, he's gonna have a chance. They got a lot of things going for them in Jacksonville. They got very patient ownership. They got a lot of cap space. They've got young talent. They're gonna have Trevor Lawrence. Let's say Trevor Lawrence is Andrew Luck and he stays healthy. Well, if they start winning and then the defensive coordinator gets hired as a head coach, a guy like Chris Ash could work his way up to being the coordinator, and then all of a sudden, they win a Super Bowl and Urban's guys become the hot commodity.
Yeah. Well.
There's Chris. I'm saying, like, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that 10 years from now, Chris Ash will have worked his way up. He might be a better fit in the NFL. You don't have to recruit. You don't have to deal with boosters. You don't have to, pretend that you care about the 150th anniversary of college football in the NFL. All that stuff. And then who knows?
Well, I think
Chris is a good X's and O's coach, and that's what you need to be in the NFL.
You need to be a motivator too. I mean, they just didn't hire Robert Saleh because he's a good X's and O's coach. They hired him because he's got a personality that players that's not going to change in the NFL.
That'll be his drawback. You asked the wrong question now, Paletti, and I'm going to turn it back. I'm going to become the host and turn the tables to you. True or false, Paletti?
Mm-hmm.
Kyle Flood will be a college football head coach again.
I'm going to go true on that. I think there's the more. I'll put it this way: it's more likely to me that Kyle Flood will be a head coach in college football again than Chris Ash will be an NFL head coach. If I had to bet one of those two things, I'm going to bet on that.
I would agree with that.
Kyle Flood landing in Texas with Sark and as the as an offensive coordinator, I guess. So I guess he won't be doing play calling, but he's obviously going to be the offensive line coach. Had a really good year at Alabama as a national championship to his credit. And I'm going to say false. To answer my own question, because I still think when you start peeling away the layers at what he did at Rutgers, there's going to be so many question marks, and it's going to be tougher in AD once you get to that level. Now, it depends. I mean, if UConn or like a Northeast program like that tries to get back into it, and could they take the shot out of 27-24? He rehab maybe, but I'm going to still say false.
You can spin it. Go ahead, Chris.
Does FCS level count for this? Because here's my thing.
I think he could be I think he could be a FCS for sure.
Because here's my thing. Like,
I don't think he's going to want to. I don't think I think he'd want to get back to like I say, UConn would be a place that makes sense.
The one thing that I found weird about Kyle's move to Texas is that, look, if something goes wrong at Texas, and we have a very rich track record of things going wrong at Texas, over the last decade or so, like firing the coordinators is kind of like the go-to move. And, like if Sark doesn't, take off like a rocket in 2 years, they're gonna have to fire Kyle, and then Kyle's, that's the thing. Like at Alabama, now look, it also could be a situation where, and I get it, like working for Nick Saban cannot be terribly easy. So maybe at some point you put in your 2 years and like, okay, like let's go have a little bit easier pace of life. Obviously he's got a relationship with Sark from the time together with the Falcons, but at least if you're the line coach at Alabama, like you're always kind of ascending, you're always moving upward. But at Texas, if the offense isn't good and you don't recruit great, you're going to take the fall. Then you're kind of knocked off that track. But like I agree with Sarge, like,
let's be honest, Saban took him less than 5 minutes to hire his replacement. I think it was someone he worked with back in like 2004, 2005, a really high quality offensive line coach. I don't think Saban lost any sleep, and that's no disrespect to what Kyle Flood did this year. But Saban, could fall out of bed and find 5 quality offensive line coaches. And he did.
I'm not saying that Saban lost any sleep. I guess what I'm saying is Kyle's comeback story was always going to be ascending at Alabama.
He made a good move. He got a better title. He's following someone, who's, it was a good move for Kyle Flood from a coming back perspective.
Would be a good place for Kyle? Temple.
I can see that. Temple.
Temple.
A Northeast program.
Temple, a good place for anybody. Yeah.
Well, but like I say no to UMass and UConn, but you can't win at either of those places. And UConn might not even have a football team, in a couple of months. No. But Temple, the Rod Carey thing is clearly not working. They've had, they became the Kansas City A's for Rutgers this offseason in the transfer portal.
Kyle Flood and Greg Schiano competing for South Jersey recruits, baby.
Oh man. Can you imagine?
I'll write that one.
Yeah. But that's one thing that popped in my mind. Like Temple school, Kyle's background really isn't going to be an issue because the Philadelphia Inquirer is going to throw like one fastball at them, and then the world's going to move on. So
I can see that.
Well, that was interesting. Good discussion about former Rutgers coaches. Fill half our podcast. All right. So what else do we have to talk about here?
Suriano.
Suriano is good. So that was all right. So tell me what he did that was impressive again. It was an impressive thing he did in France.
Yes. He stormed his way to the Henry DeGlane Grand Prix title at 57 kilograms, outscored his opponents 18-2. Wow. And look, the big thing was the question about Nick's international, freestyle has been, as a defensive wrestler, he is one of the best in the world. You cannot score on Nick Suriano. The question has always been, can he generate enough offense against these Olympic caliber guys, both domestically and overseas, to have, to string wins together? Because it always seemed like it was going to be very difficult for him to win a gold medal or to make the Olympic team if he basically had to win every bout, 2-2 on criteria.
Right.
So he proved, he opened it up. He had offense. He was physically dominant. He was scoring points. He's a very real contender to make the Olympic team. And if you kind of, you take that freestyle offense and add it to his defense, he's got a really good shot to be a gold medalist.
I just hope there is an Olympic team. That is still an open-ended question whether or not we're going to, the way the vaccine rollout is going so far, it gives me a lot of concern about whether or not they're going to be able to pull it off in Tokyo. But that's for another podcast entirely. All right. Good transition for us going to football for a minute on the Tyshawn Fog News. Sarge, I was thinking about this. If you were to make a list, like before this offseason, give me the 10 guys that Greg Schiano would most want to have back. I mean, at this point, I got to feel like he's got 8 or 9 of them, right? I mean, that's a pretty impressive job of keeping that team together, when in an era of college football, when mobility, people move on, people jump into the next opportunity all the time.
No doubt. And I think, that's kind of what we talked about toward the end of the year. How many of these guys was he going to be able to get to come back? And, the secret to the 2021 season, folks, is going to be, having those leaders and having those guys who are, 4-year, 5-year guys who are already developed. I'm not saying that they'd be able to compete with, an Ohio State or a Penn State at that point, but you have to keep in mind, that they're going to have more guys back. They're going to have more experience. They're going to have a chance, with that. Suriano's track record from his first tenure too, his best teams were the ones that had, were senior laden. So, his ability so far to be able to keep these guys back. Now, keep in mind, a lot of these other programs, are experiencing the same stuff, because we're headed toward an NFL draft with a lot of questions of whether or not guys are going to be able to work out, whether or not there's going to be an NFL combine. We saw this past year where scouts weren't traveling. So, there's going to be just as many questions with the 2021 draft. So I think you're going to see a lot of 5th-year, 6th-year seniors, during the 21 season, not just at Rutgers, but, at a lot of other Big Ten schools too.
All right, correct. So we have 03, you got Tyshawn Fogg, you got Raekwon O'Neal. I'm just going through, you got Bull Melton. Who are like the 3 or 4 guys right now that you're uncertain about? I mean, obviously we haven't heard any news about Trey Avery Young. I mean, which players right now out there still have not made the decision that you think are on the bubble for not coming back?
Yeah, so yesterday was obviously the deadline for underclassmen, so it seems like, Pacheco, Young, all those guys, they're safe. Like, those guys are coming back. We're still, Trey Avery's a guy that we're still kind of waiting on. Nick Crimmin, it seemed like Drew Singleton will be back. They basically, with the exception of Crimmin and Avery, you basically have got everybody coming back. It seems like Giovanni Haskins is coming back. He's the guy who could have left. So they've done really good at retaining, the key guys. My big question is, have they brought in enough? Have they done enough in the transfer portal to really be able to kind of make a move this coming fall? And right now, unless, some guys really kind of exceed what I'm expecting, I'm going to say the answer is no.
So what did you need to see? You need to see a quarterback specifically?
I think getting a quarterback would help, but my big thing is, they need a tight end, which they haven't gotten. Offensive line, a guy like Josh Youngblood, dynamic return guy. You already have a dynamic return guy, I think one of the big themes of the spring practice is going to be, can Tyquan Underwood turn him into the same type of receiving threat that Aaron Cruikshank developed into this past season? So, yeah, I just, offensive line, Patrice Renee, bring him in at cornerback. Great, good move. He's a guy who was a starter at North Carolina when he's healthy. He's had some durability issues the last 2 seasons, but also they need safeties, and they have pretty good depth at cornerback. Yeah, I just look at this team, and I think they're going to be about the same, maybe a little bit better, but that schedule is going to take a major step forward.
Right. Absolutely. All right. Hopefully we will have if we don't have the Olympics, hopefully we'll have a football schedule, at least in the spring. All right, guys, let's dive into some Rutgers Insider questions. As always, thank you for subscribing, NJ.com/insider. Good time to sign up. I think Kevin Manahan had some sort of special on Twitter I saw this morning. What was that all about? Cratch, did you see this? He's offering something?
Yes, if you're a new subscriber to NJ.com/insider, Rutgers Sports Insider, and you email the sports director, Kevin Manahan, at kmanahan@njadvancemedia.com, and specify large or extra large, you potentially could get a free Eric LeGrand role model T-shirt.
How about that? He's going to drop it off at your house personally. I'm going to put that out there right now. Manahan's going to drive over and present it with you in a gift bag. All right. Here's the first question. What needs to change to get Gio, Ron, and Tez offensively on track? Perhaps Paul or Caleb go back into the starting lineup? Basketball question for you, obviously, when you have your 3 best scorers, and if I forgot to mention, Montez Mathis is also in a bit of a slump, struggling at the same time. The one thing we've learned about Steve Pikiell, he's not going to be the kind of guy who's going to, get into guys' faces for that sort of thing. He is a player's coach. It's not going to change who he is. Should he change the starting lineup? What do you think? Either one of you guys got an opinion on that?
Yeah, I have always said when I look at Geo Baker's game specifically, I know it's hard to, a guy who's given so much, there is something you're going to want to start a guy like that. But I've always said when you look at his game, like he'd be better off coming off the bench, giving energy.
Really?
I have. I still believe that. But again, there's it's hard to take him out of the starting lineup.
He's such a leader for this team.
He
too.
is, exactly. And so you're not going to want to do that. I'm just throwing it out there as far as, the question is yes. I think the more tinkering he does with the starting lineup until he figures out a lineup that. And when we talk about starting lineup, we're talking about the lineup, because Peichel will argue all the time. Well, it doesn't matter who starts; it's who finishes. We're talking about the five guys who are going to be playing in crunch time. That's how I'm defining what the starting lineup would be. So I do think that until he figures out the right mix, I think you're going to see more Paul Mulcahy though. I think he's a guy who's he's gotten better. He's been pretty consistent. And Jacob Young, as whenever we see him providing energy, he needs to be on the court as well.
Right. And I think Mulcahy didn't have necessarily his best game against Wisconsin. If a bunch of turnovers seemed like he was forcing an event. But Jacob Young has been great, of course, though.
Mulcahy's been an X factor. And like when you see, sometimes stats don't really matter with that kid. When he's playing at a high level and he's like an X factor type kid.
Yeah. And I have to say though, and it goes back to the same thing we've talked about here. And fans try some crazy that Wisconsin game. They made that rally in the second half where you're like, all right, well, this isn't over yet. Jacob Young gets to the free throw line of the 1-on-1 situation, right? Yeah. Clanks off I think we're down by 4 or 5 at that point. Clanks it off the rim. That's it. That was the end of it.
Miles Johnson too, and great kid. He does a lot of great things, but it's hard to keep him on the court in crunch time when he's going to miss his free throws. I mean, it's one of those. It's an Achilles heel that they need to figure out.
Big problem. All right, next question is a football question. Did the football team have a better season than expected by many because they surprised a number of opponents, not to mention the COVID craziness? This coming year, teams will be ready for the Knights. How does the team prepare differently? Kratz, do you think that was a big factor this season, the fact that the Scarlet Knights just surprised people?
So Tom Allen said something, Indiana coach, I thought was really interesting. I think it was like last week. He said that when they were game planning this year, Indiana, he said they kept things very vanilla on offense and on defense, but I think mostly offense because his thought process was, what happens for, obviously you had this shortened kind of weird training camp, lack of practice. What happens if we get to Friday and a key starter tests positive, and all of a sudden I've got a backup in there who doesn't really know what's going on. He's kind of like overwhelmed by the game plan. We got to keep it simple because we might have bodies moving in and out at the last second. I wonder if we're going to find out that maybe while some of these big 10 teams were kind of vanilla and basic, did Rutgers kind of use a lot more of its scheme than maybe other schools did just because they needed to? We saw a lot of stuff from Sean Gleason. So I think that's one thing to watch is, did we see more of did Rutgers show more of its playbook than maybe other programs did in the conference? But I think they should be more advanced in year 2 in the scheme, finally having some stability in the offense with the same offensive coordinator. But I do think there was a little bit of an element surprise. People didn't really know to expect from Rutgers that they're not going to have because there's going to be all this film on them this year.
Right. And obviously that's going to make it a little harder. But from what we see, you have to, even by the 4th or 5th week of the season, the element was surprised, was gone, and Rutgers was still doing better offensively than anyone expected. So I think when you have a good coach like Sean Gleason, that's a big equalizer. All right, next question. How big is the loss of K'Ron Adams? He showed some great bursts of power and speed. Thanks, and have a good show. Given that position, they have a lot of depth at running back. I don't think it's a big loss. Do you disagree?
No, I don't think it's a big loss. Jameer Wright-Collins, they're really high on him. I think he can kind of be a big bruising change of pace back. Pacheco's back. They've got to get Aaron Young more involved in the offense anyway. They got some fast guys coming in. Al-Shadi Salam, Kyle Monagai, obviously the Don Bosco kid who was basically a special teams player this past season. They've got guys there. I think K'Ron Adams was a guy who wanted to be a featured back, wanted more carries, and he's definitely going to get that at UMass.
Right. Okay. What do you think? What do you think, Sarge?
Not a big loss. I agree with all that. I mean, I think he had, one or two games that, he stood out, but generally speaking, Cratch, hit on all the notes. I think, I wouldn't be surprised also if, come post spring, and we talk about other positions too, but, I think they could probably bolster that post spring with maybe a grad transfer.
Right. All right. One last football question. It was related to Cratch's football depth chart piece. A discussion about the desperate need for the offensive line to develop would be great. Greg Schiano said it again and again, Cratch, this has got to be a developmental program. Clearly, he's looking for, based on the Temple transfer and other situations, he's still looking for plug-and-play guys. I mean, is this just too soon to expect him to develop his own offensive lineman at this point?
No, I mean, I think the big key is going to be like a guy like C.J. Hansen. This is now his second year in the program. Like, how does it, what does he look like? They're getting to the point where, Reggie Sutton, Raekwon O'Neal, those guys should really be coming into their own and being, standout starters. If they bring Crimmon back, I think that's a big boost. They've got options. They definitely have options. I think the big question is going to be, can those guys succeed and excel while Schiano is bringing in his own offensive linemen and developing them? Because we saw the first two cycles they kind of leaned towards the defensive line, which is where they felt clearly they needed more help. Now we're seeing commit 2023 community, like we're seeing them kind of focus more on the offensive line, kind of replenish that group. So look, I think the offensive line was much better than we expected last year, and they've only added guys to that. So I think that could be a real kind of strong spot potentially if those guys continue to progress.
Right, both sides. I mean, we're talking defensive line too. Again, there's another. Other than Dwayne Four, they've kept that line intact. They're adding players on that side too. So that is obviously was the biggest priority talent wise coming in for Greg Schiano. He seems to be answering that bell. All right, that's all the questions we had this week. We had a lot of people who just texted to vent about the basketball team, and I read all of them. I understand the frustration. Thursday night, hopefully that'll be a different deal. All right, guys, what do we got? Anything else we have to talk about here? That's all I have on my
some news. The women's basketball team, I guess, they continue to be in their COVID hell right now. They just canceled both games this week, Penn State and Iowa. So they're going to get dangerously close to falling under, what was it, 12 games, Cratch? There's a threshold of games.
It's 13 games now. Couple things. My understanding is that they haven't obviously resumed team practice. There are players and coaches who have not tested positive throughout this whole thing, and they've been able to kind of have like small, I think masked, activities. So it hasn't been a complete total shutdown, but it's been pretty close to it. That being said, I think they still have like 10 games maybe off the top of my head left. They're 5-3, I believe, so they only have to play 5 more games to hit the minimum for the NCAA tournament. They should be able to do that. I mean, obviously, you never say, never, because other teams could have COVID issues, but you also think that they would probably have the ability to reschedule some of these games. I think one of my big questions is going to be, there's a report over the weekend, that the Big Ten might move the conference tournament from Chicago to Indianapolis. The women's tournament's already on the books to be held in Indianapolis that week. So I'm curious if they're going to run 2 tournaments in the same city at the same time, or they may be thinking about, hey, we should eliminate the women's tournament and just try to reschedule games over that week. The one thing I'll say is I know naturally the question is going to be, I think Vanderbilt actually did it earlier today. We've seen several Power 5 women's basketball teams opt out of the season because of that. Nothing I've heard makes me think that's imminent here. The one thing to keep in mind about Rutgers, they are top 20 in the net rankings, the women's team. So if they can get back on the court healthy and play a good amount of games down the stretch, they should still have a chance to make the NCAA tournament, which obviously is the goal every year for Vivian Stringer and her team. So I think that the hope is that this is the last 2 games they've got to postpone. They get back on the court next week and kind of can go from there.
It's just really sad. I mean, this is a team, that does have some talent and some really good stories, and just sad that they're in this rut where they're obviously dealing with some pretty serious issues of COVID cases. So
yeah, I just think it goes to show you like how remarkable it is that the football team pulled off this completely and that. The men's basketball team.
It's gotten to a point where when teams aren't testing positive, they're having outbreaks where it's surprising. It's gotten to that point.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and it's not. I think one of the things is that, without knowing the specifics, this can happen when a team does everything right.
Yeah.
Because once the virus kind of penetrates the wall, I mean, the Big Ten loves to talk about its antigen testing protocol, and it works to an extent, but it's not a bullet. It's not a magic bullet. And once they're spread, and it's and I think the numbers too with the 17-day sit out, it can really kind of knock a basketball team out for a long time. Look at Iona. I think Iona is on like their third or fourth quarantine. It's just kind of crazy.
Well, we talk about Rutgers basketball. Men's basketball. They deserve some credit because they've steered clear, and it's a knock on wood situation that Steve Peichel doesn't like talking about. But they've been able to manage it. I don't know what he's doing specifically, but somehow, some way they've been able to avoid it as well.
Especially since they share the same building with the women.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
the gymnastics team had a problem too, right?
Last week,
third team in that building.
Last week, the 4 teams in the APC, all of them had a game postponed due to coronavirus. Now, right. Gymnastics, for what it's worth, they actually announced a revised schedule. They added Maryland to their competition this week to make it a tri-meet. So the fact that they're coming out and announcing like a revised schedule indicates maybe they're going to be okay to compete this week. But as we said before, Rutgers is not being very transparent with any of this. But it really just an unfortunate situation for the women's basketball team, the team that had a chance to kind of make some noise this year potentially.
I love when Kretsch talks gymnastics scheduling. Don't you love it?
It's tremendous. Tremendous.
Really. They added Maryland to
the only problem is that we're burying the lead with it. We should have led with gymnastics, right. I think.
No, they'll do that next week.
But
all right.
No soccer or field hockey schedules yet. Still, yeah.
Okay. We'll
Big
keep
Ten's still
lacrosse.
working on
that yet? No? Lacrosse out? No?
No, but so we had a great mailbag question about men's lacrosse. This is a big year for men's lacrosse. Not now. If you're not going to make the NCAA tournament this year, then
Kretsch, put Brian Breck on the hot seat in his mailbag. If readers, should check out his most recent mailbag. Put a little pressure on Brian Breck. Brian Breck, has done some good things, with that program for sure. And I think, by all accounts, it sounds like they have, maybe his best roster to date. And they've caused some bad luck as far as not making the NCAA tournament. But Kretsch, did put a little pressure, and understandably so. You talk about money and what coaches make, in comparison to what others make. He's at the top end, right behind Scott Goodale, who's obviously accomplished a lot more. When you think about the national championship wrestlers that he's produced. So. I think, making the NCAA tournament this year, if there is one for men's lacrosse, should not be that's a goal that they should strive for.
Look, I'll say this, like putting, any name aside, like there are sports at Rutgers where it's always going to be tough to win at, and there are sports that Rutgers really should excel at every year. I would argue that men's lacrosse is one of those sports. It's incredible to me that the State University of New Jersey, in a lacrosse, crazed state, I mean, Bridgewater Raritan probably could field 2 high school lacrosse teams that could be in the top 10 in the state. Summit, same thing, Del Barton, all these top programs. You can't go 16 years without making the NCAA tournament. Just doesn't add up to me. And now you've got this beautiful state-of-the-art Rodkin Center that you just moved into. You're in the Big Ten. You've got this tremendous roster. You got everything going for you. You got to knock the door down at some point.
I'm sorry. I was just Googling the gymnastics schedule. You're right. Yeah. Big news coming up soon. All right. On that note, I think we should sign off for this week. Steve Politi, Keith Sargent, James Cratch will be back after the next couple of basketball games. We'll have a much better idea whether or not the three of us will be spending much of March in Indianapolis. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Acast recommends more podcasts, more episodes, more great shows. Keep listening to hear a show we recommend.
Hi, I'm Christopher Kimball, host of Milk Street Radio. If you'd like to change the way you cook and also think about food, please check out the Milk Street podcast. We travel around the world to find pizza in Tokyo, Egyptian food in Berlin, and Bhutanese farmers in Vermont. We speak to Jamie Oliver, Rachel Ray, Al Roker, Ina Garten, as well as Michael Twitty, Marcus Samuelson, and Alice Waters. And we'll introduce you to recipes that will change the way you cook, from bright pink Tottenham cake to Afghan dumplings to shoyu sugar steak, and that one is direct from Hawaii. It's a whole new world of food right here on Milk Street Radio. Please check us out on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts, or go to 177milkstreet.com. We'll see you there.
Acast recommends.